forget. Hi,
Nice.
everybody. So some of you I know, some of you I don't know. Some of you Keith knows, some of you Keith doesn't know. For those who don't know me, I'm Jake. Hi. Welcome to our PT classes. So glad to have you, and so glad to have continued this on into PT89, and that we're at a point now where we're getting to do this, almost latest of released tests from LSAC. Um, we have somebody else joining us. So, for those of you who don't know, this test is designed not only as a way to help you through prep tests, but as a means to help you learn to self study. And ultimately, what we're trying to do in a different manner from the way that we have done things in the past and the way that other people do things is to serve not only to enable you to improve your score, but to think about this test, about the content of the test, and about the way that you go about preparing for things like it in a different way. Too often, our time and energy and effort is wasted trying to implement things that are merely tricks, um, well designed to get you right answers more often, but don't aren't really additive to you as a thinker or as a student or as an intellectual or as a lawyer. And we want to do things in a different way. And so some of that, and a lot of what we'll talk about today, is about how you put yourself in a position to become more highly organized, more rigorous about the way that you look at things and then review things, and ways that you sort of go about your preparation both for this and for the future. And there really are a lot of things to carry forward into law school, despite what other people will say. They might not be central to the LSAT, but if they are not central, they are certainly peripheral and certainly critical. So that's that. So hi everybody, I'm Jake.
I'm
Um,
Keith. I think I know most of you, but Jake and I have been tutoring for a lot of years, and we've worked with many of you individually, and we're glad that you've joined our class. And so, welcome, and hope you enjoy our review of Prep Test 89.
so before we get on to the test itself, and let me grab my speaker notes so that I can know what's coming before I get there. We wanted to talk a little bit about the next couple weeks and about what we're going to do as we prep for the June test coming up and what you guys can do to prep for the June test coming up. So, first of all, it's really, really important to remember, especially as we head into the home stretch for the June takers. This is a skill test. Skills require practice. We're not just acquiring knowledge, and the knowledge that we acquire isn't automatically implementable, right? We have to keep doing the thing and doing it with deliberate practice and with a good eye on not just the content, not just the right answers, but how we go about doing it. So just looking at lectures and reading books and that's not enough. You really, this is like any sport, like any musical instrument, like anything that involves the coordination of multiple skills. You need to do it and do it mindfully. So make sure that that's not only what you're doing but how you're thinking about it. In terms of the class, yes, class time is great, and yes, you can review our lectures, but come to our open office hours. We hold 3, 4, 5 hours a week of open office hours. Come, ask questions, reflect on what we've talked about, and bring to us not only the things that you've realized, but the things that you still have questions on. Come prepared. What do I want to know? What can I do to improve upon not only the things that I struggled with, but the places that I'm doing well and could do better. So Keith has hours Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week, designated as such. I will have hours tomorrow morning. I think again for the third week in a row. Alas, I'm going to have to cancel Friday, but I'll find another hour this week so that I can have 2 hours this week because I know I've been canceling Fridays a lot, and I apologize. So please do come to those office hours and take advantage of us. That's why we have them. They're there for you because it's not enough just to show up to class and to review test sections. The engagement piece is really, really important. Okay, blind review. How does it work? Why does it work? Why do we want you to do it? Spaced repetition is vital. If you don't repeat things, you don't incorporate them into your habit. If you do them too much without the opportunity to recover and reflect, you never give yourself the opportunity to learn. You need to do a thing, give yourself space, do the thing again, and with the benefit of a little bit of time and a little bit of hindsight and a little bit of newly acquired knowledge, we can gain insight. So we have to make sure that we are repeating things over the course of time. But equally important, we have to do them with different goals in mind. So we have these three sections called timed section, blind review, and strategy planning. And each of these has a different purpose, as you can see on the slide. I like to sum it up very concisely as that your timed review is your competitive opportunity. How good a score can I get? But that's it, right? We're doing everything very intuitively. We're doing the best job that we can under the constraints that we have. Blind review is the cognitive session. What do I know? What am I able in as much time as I have to put on the page, to figure out, to unpack as much as I am able to unpack? That has a different objective, and so you have different things to accomplish when you're doing blind review. It's not just about right answers anymore, and we'll talk about that in terms of games today, and we'll talk about the other sections with different frameworks. But there's something else to be gained. It's not just can I get the right answer given as much time as I want. No, we'll accomplish something specific. But the third time through strategy planning is different again, and this one I call the metacognitive opportunity. It's not just what do I know, it's what was I thinking? How did I arrive at the answer I arrived at? Examine your intuitions, examine your knowledge, examine what went right and what went wrong. And so again, we have different objectives. Now it's not about unpacking the problem. I have the right answer in hand. It's about what should I have done all along? What was the optimal way? And so then we'll be able to take from that one or two things that are vitally important for the next time we get to that section. Keith likes to say time section is barely keeping your head above water. And I think in games, that's true for almost everybody. I'm not sure I know a single person that gets through games comfortably with 5 minutes left and twiddles their thumbs. It's just not a thing. We're keeping our head above water. We're trying to make sure that we get right answers in that time. Blind review is, as we say in the slide here, gaining traction, right? It's making sure that you've got your feet on the ground solidly underneath you and understanding just what is on the page and all of its implications. So not skimming by the surface and getting answers, but say, no, what's the right way? What's the proper understanding of the language in front of me? Strategy planning is about improvement. What could I have done better? How could I have been more efficient on the things that I knew? And how could I have known the right thing on the things that I didn't? And ultimately, this is mostly about teaching yourself. Because in a paradigm like this, where you're prepping for a test without structure around you, without an instructor looking over your shoulder at every opportunity, it's your opportunity to be your own teacher, and that means having to be reflective of your own learning, not just the things you knew, but how you arrived there. If you had a teacher, your teacher would be handling that for you. But you don't. You don't have that every day. If you're doing 10, 20 hours a week, you need to be self-reflective at various points throughout that time. If you aren't, if you let too much time go by, there's too much to reflect on. So you need that self-reflection to happen in half-hour, 45-minute chunks. Make sure you're doing that at every opportunity possible. Keith, anything to add?
No, I've got a deduction slide coming up. Go ahead.
Okay. We'll plow through this so we can get to these games because I know these were hard. Just as a quick review, most of you have heard this. We're going to say it again because it warrants saying over and over and over again. Have a game plan. Make sure that you are aware of the fact that you are allowed to skip a game and come back to it. Okay? If you see a game that you don't understand how to set it up, you don't understand the rules, your mind is in a tizzy, give yourself permission. I'm going to skip to the next game and I'll come back to it. Manage your time. Don't get hung up on hard questions. If you get to a rule sub and you don't see the deduction and you don't see the path to it, skip it. It's okay. Don't waste 4 minutes on question number 11 and then not have time for the third game. Make sure you prioritize by game type if you have a preference. Now, not everybody does, but I think most people probably should. And not everybody's preference is the same. For me, I prefer to do simple linear and simple sequencing before anything else. That's the easiest kind of game for me. It's the one that I see the fastest. After that, I'll go on to simple categories games, right? Simple grouping, simple sort of multilinear games that are in sort of that have sort of categorical variables in them. Then I'll move on to hybrid games, right? Groups within groups or linear within groups. Then I save complexities for later, and we're going to talk about complexities a little bit today because, man, did we have some complexities today. And then bizarre stimulus rules, things that are really strange, like the virus game, like circle games, like really weird stuff. But those are rare. You'll see those once every 3 or 4 tests. For the most part, we're going to fall in the first 4 and know the way that you want to do it. Make sure that that's the way that you do it. How to attack a game in and of itself. This should be straightforward, and I'm pretty sure you're all doing this. But if you're not, or if you haven't verbalized this to yourself, make sure you do. Step 1, read the stimulus, identify it by type. I like to identify things in 2 types. I find generally things are either linear or they are grouping. There's sort of an overarching primary way that the game works. It either works by lining things up or it works by putting things in buckets. That's the way I like to think of it. You may think of it a little differently. You may think of it more in the traditional power scoring model, in which case you're talking about 7 types or whatever it is. But have your typing. For me, it's 3 or 4 feels like the max. Identify its type based on the stimulus. Draw your board. Write it out first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 with a big line under it. Or group A, group B, C with lines under each of them. Or your 2x4 box if you've got a 2x4 box. But create a blank board first so you have something to look at. If you don't know how to set up that board, look to the first question. It's likely going to tell you how to do it. It's likely going to show you in those answer choices how to do it. It's not always true. In this case, there were a couple of games that sort of didn't look the same way as the board should have looked, but generally that's right. If you're struggling to know whether it's linear, there are always some clues, right? Linear are things that have 1, 2, 3 days of the week, months of the year, right? Floors in a building, right? Ways that things have to go in sequence. Whereas grouping is about labels. It's about categories, right? Area 1, Area 2, Area 3. Teachers that teach in the different classrooms, things like that. But that's generally what we're looking for the board setup. Once you've done that, then your job is to write down your rules. If anybody is not currently taking the rules as they are on the page and writing them for themselves on their scrap paper, start doing it now. But when we say to do that, we don't mean copy it word for word. Make sure you are paraphrasing those rules into symbology, something visual, something simple, but something that when you read it, you know exactly what it means. And we do this for 2 reasons. One, because we want to be able to work right from our scrap paper and not have to go back and forth between board and rules on the screen, right? But number 2 is that by translating them, by coming up with visual symbols for those rules, we analyze the rules and we force ourselves to understand them. So if we have to come up with something to write down on our page, the first thing we do is, what does this rule mean? And we think about it, right? If we don't do that, if we don't write it down, we give ourselves permission or we give ourselves the opportunity to not analyze that rule, and then we might misunderstand it. So make sure that you're copying those rules down, and then we jump into the deductive process. Before we move on to deductions, does anybody have any questions about this as a lead-in to doing a game? Okay, cool. So I'm going to pass it over to Keith, and Keith can talk a bit about deductions.
We're going to apply all of this abstract stuff to the games in a moment using a whiteboard, and we'll take questions, but I want to address one thing up front. What is a deduction? Because one of the most common questions that I get from students is, how do I get better at making deductions? Unfortunately, what they usually mean is, how do I get better at making deductions on a timed test? And The answer to that is you have to get better at making the deductions slowly before you can make them quickly. And so my take has always been that you really get good at making deductions during blind review. If you'll slow way down, instead of just looking to answer the questions, but spend a lot of time thinking about the rules and how to paraphrase them. If you've worked with me in the past, you know that I think paraphrasing is probably the most important skill for the entire LSAT. And I'm going to use that same term multiple times for all three of the different section types. For logic games, the way that paraphrasing comes into play is being able to read the rule, interpret it correctly, and then visualize or think about different ways to paraphrase or symbolize that rule. Right? If you can come up with the best visual symbol, then you cut out some of the complexity of the rule. In other words, you take the complex verbal rule that they give you and you turn it into a simple visual symbol. So the symbols themselves are a type of deduction. A paraphrase is a type of deduction. But also what people are really talking about when they ask me about deductions is how to derive new pieces of information from the rules, how to dig deeper and see what's behind the rules. And again, I think that you don't jump to being great at that skill. You tease out the deductions slowly during blind review, and then they just simply occurred to you more quickly on time tests if you've gone slowly and taken the time to really tease out the meaning and importance of the various deductions. But even when students do find deductions, what I find is different between their strategy and mine is typically their willingness to document it. As soon as something occurs to me, I write it down because I know I'm going to forget it. My entire test strategy entails having a plan for what I'm going to do when I screw up, because I know I'm going to screw up. And the idea is to think about all the different ways that I've screwed up in the past and to have a specific plan for each one of them until I get really good at that skill and stop screwing up that particular thing. So I'm likely to forget deductions. That's a way that I screw up. Therefore, I don't demand that I remember the deductions. I simply write them down in the most clever ways possible so that I can keep the documentation, going forward for future reference. And to piggyback off that point, I do the same thing for binary and ternary restrictions, which I find my students are less likely to do. What I mean by binary or ternary restriction is that if I figure out that I'm down to two options, either for one variable or for one box in my diagram, I'm likely to document that too. Even though I'm not down to the final deduction, I don't want to have to trace my steps over and over again to whittle it down to those two or those three, in those three options. So as soon as I'm down to two or three, I think that's few enough to document so that I can pick up that, pick up the thread from that piece of information and move forward once I get additional information from the questions or from inspiration as I move through the game. But my initial goal is to document these restrictions so that I can start working with them more concretely and they're not just these abstract uh, things that I once thought of in the past. I mean, basically, the bottom line is as soon as you think of something, you start forgetting it. And so, a good thinker, a good reader, a good test taker will leave breadcrumbs to go back and find the trail of the important information. And the best kind of breadcrumb that you can leave is a highly visual symbol that will instantaneously tell you the meaning of the rule without having to reread the complex verbal articulation of the rule. So we're going to show you some of our diagrams for all four of the games. And one of the things I want you to think about is simply, do your rules look as good as ours? Are they as visual as ours? Are they doing as good a job of conveying the information? Because if not, that's step one to getting better at deductions. If you're doing that well, then step two is, are you seeing some of the deeper insights? And if not, one of the problems could be that you're not bothering to document the binary or the ternary restrictions, and so you're forgetting some of the connections that you've made before you can make the final step of the puzzle. All right, let's go to the next slide. This is why I wanted to hold off talking before, because I think that this set of games really works well for worlds. Jake and I talked a lot today about worlds and how to implement it on this set of games. And I was of the opinion that you could use it for all 4 games. He thinks maybe the first 3 and not so much the 4th game. I kind of come around to that position, but certainly knowing how to use worlds is very powerful for this set of games. So if you're going to understand what we're up to in the diagrams that we're about to show you, you have to have a concrete understanding of what we mean by worlds. What we mean is breaking the game up into a small number of hypotheticals that represent the entire game. When I say hypotheticals, I mean hypothetical solutions. And if we add them all up, it will represent the entire game, every single solution. So these aren't random hypotheticals. I've seen people do that in the past. They'll just do a few solutions to the game to kind of figure out how the rules work and get a couple things in the library to get going. That's not what we're talking about when we are demonstrating worlds. We're talking about this kind of global approach where we're looking for the major inflection points of the game. Are there rules that just go 2 ways or 3 ways, where we can sketch out every single possibility for that rule, just to simplify this game so that we're not thinking about 30 solutions all at once, but we can break it down to 3 or 4 worlds that have 5 to 10 solutions each, 4 simpler games instead of 1 complex game. So to do worlds, I'm usually looking for binary or ternary rules or deductions. I don't want 100 worlds. That defeats the purpose. I want 3 or 4 worlds. And so I have to find those rules that only have 2 or 3 or possibly 4 ways that the rule can go. If there's 2 binary rules, I can combine them to come up with 4 worlds. So look at the example that I have here. Suppose rule 1 has 2 options, A or B. And then rule 2 has 2 options, X or Y. I really don't care what they are. I just want to demonstrate that I could create 4 worlds that illustrate all of the options for this game by combining those 4 options in all the different combinations possible. So for example, suppose we choose for rule 1A and then combine it with X for rule 2. Or what if we do A for rule 1 combined with Y for rule 2? And then now let's switch it up. We choose B for rule 1 and combine it with X for rule 2. And then finally B for rule 1 matched with Y for rule 2. Right? 4 different pairings. And that's every different possible way that either rule could go, every different possible way that they could match with one another. So we get 4 simpler versions of the game instead of 1 huge complex version of the game. I've become really quite a big fan of worlds. And if you're taking the test in June, you certainly don't want to lean on this for your time test. But for blind review and for longer term studiers, it is a very powerful method to learn. You want to jump in about worlds, Jake? You're on mute.
There we go. I was just chatting about this in the chat with Isabel. What's really important here is realizing that worlds isn't just a means to getting a better score, right? That's not the objective. The objective is to understand the game better. One of the balances that I talk about a lot with people in terms of their study is understanding that blind review isn't your chance to get all the answers right. Blind review is your chance to understand the game better. If you're a person who's sort of compelled to do brute force through most questions, ultimately what that means is you should be thinking about how I can make more deductions ahead of time to make myself more efficient, which means your blind review should be focused on, if I were to build worlds for this, how would I go about doing it? Not so that you can understand how to do worlds the next time around, but so that you can understand the mechanics of deductions outside of the context of trying to get a right answer, right? Because the better you are at seeing deductions, the easier time you're going to have when you're brute forcing a question. Because ultimately, what are you doing in brute force? You're making the deductions you have to in the moment in order to get that right answer. The better you get at finding deductions, the better you are at brute force.
Let me give you guys an analogy for this. When I started working with Jake, he was able to help me sharpen my brute force skills. Right, I'm really good at making deductions. I rarely have to rely on brute forcing, and so it's something that I really neglected. I didn't work on it intentionally. I just had kept hoping that I would get so good at making deductions that I would eventually never not need the brute force approach. So now I'm much, much better at brute forcing because I practice it every time I do blind review, every time I prep for class, I do a lot of brute forcing. So, but that doesn't mean that I intend to brute force my next time test, right? Brute forcing is a way for me to study the exam. It's a way for me to hone skills that I hope I don't have to use. So worlds can be something similar. I might use worlds on a time test, but I might not. I might use worlds just to unpack sticky or complex situations on blind review so that I have a better understanding of games. And then hopefully I don't have to use that approach. It sharpens my skills so much that I don't need it. Or I have it in my back pocket if everything else fails. You know, it's that kind of thinking. So we're not advocating that you go out and start using worlds on every time test. That would definitely be a disaster because not all games are amenable to it, and you're probably not good enough at it to pull it off, even on some of the games where it is possible to do it. But if you'll practice using worlds and practice brute forcing, practice different strategies on blind review, then you walk into the official test with a larger toolkit for every question, every game that you do.
Another analogy which might be helpful, right? If you're first learning to play tennis, generally people are most comfortable hitting a forehand. For those who don't know tennis, go look it up on YouTube and you can see. You use your dominant hand and you've got your racket, and that's sort of the way people swing rackets most of the time. So that's what they're going to do when they play, is they're going to find ways to hit forehands. So what's your teacher going to do? Your teacher's going to tell you got to get better at your backhand, swing in the other direction, right? So you're going to work on that. But if you're playing competitively, what are you going to do? You're going to rely on the thing that you're good at. So you're going to keep hitting forehands until such time as you've been working on your backhand long enough that in the moment, in a match, a ball goes to your backhand and you do it because it's instinct. And suddenly you're like, hey, that was a really good opportunity to use a backhand. And I did it. And I hit it pretty well. Maybe next time I'll try it again. And the same is kind of true here, right? Like you'll do brute force and you do it and you do it and you do it. Now I did brute forcing on games almost exclusively for 10 years, right? And it's the way I did it because I could always get all the games right, and it wasn't meaningful to me to do anything different. But when worlds became a thing that people talked about and it was the way that people were trying to solve games, I had to learn what they were doing. And suddenly when I started looking at new tests again, or tests that I hadn't seen in a long time, it occurred to me, hey, this is a great game to do worlds. And then after a while, I gave myself the opportunity to try it, and I said, you know what? It's better for this game. It's a better approach for this game. I'm going to do it. And I went from 98% brute force to, I don't know, I'm probably 50-50 now. And it's not binary, right? It's not you either do worlds entirely or you do brute force entirely. There's sort of a blend for me. Game 4 on this one, I got halfway through my deductions, and I was like, I'm done. I'm going to go answer some questions. I don't want to think about this anymore. And that was fine. It was helpful. Anything further? Let's move on to complications here, because complications are important. It's really important to recognize as you're doing a game whether the game is a standard game, something you've seen before and seen frequently, or whether there's something weird about it. And it's important to know something's weird about it, because guess what? When something's weird about it, some of the rules are going to act in different ways, as Pete and I rudely discovered on game 1 here. Because the idea of being third in a regular old linear game, third means third no matter what. When there's a complication, when there's something weird, suddenly third may not mean third anymore. Third may mean fourth or even fifth. So you have to be careful about whether there are things about the game that you're not expecting. So we came up with this series of questions that you've got to ask yourself, and you can do it informally timed, right? Be aware of the things that are there as you read them in the stimulus. But in blind review, be strict about it and make sure you've answered these questions for yourselves. And I really am religious about it. So I've got a couple of slides to demonstrate what they look like, right? Frequency and distribution, right? Why are these important? Because when frequency is set, it means that each of my tiles, each of my variables goes in exactly once to exactly the same number of spaces as variables. That's lovely, right? Frequency and distribution. And the same can be true of grouping, right? If I have 6 tiles and I have 6 places and I know exactly how many go in each group, that's wonderful and I love that. But it doesn't always work that way. For instance, sometimes you can leave a variable out. And when you can leave a variable out, like in this case, right, where you were told that one thing could be left out, make an out group. And that way you're not leaving anything out. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and the out group, and then everything's getting placed, and you solve that problem. But it's important to recognize, hey, I've got 5 things, but I'm only going to use 4 of them. Same thing up here. I've got 6 things, but I'm only going to use 5 of them. Make sure you put that extra group where you put the things that get left out in so that you use every variable every time. Can I use any game piece more than once in a solution? So I've got 5 spots, but only 4 variables. I have to use one of them twice if that's part of the rule set, right? So in this case, I can use C twice. That sucks because I have to keep track of which one I use twice. So sometimes I've even noted that. Which one's the double? I'll put that to the side of my board so that I can note that as part of my deductive process. But make note when you can use one variable twice in the same solution. Can you use a game piece twice in the same square, which can happen in grouping games, right? In this case, I can use A twice there, I can use C twice here, right? This is possible in a game. So make sure you're aware of that as a possibility. Flower games are notorious for that, bouquets of flowers. Can a single game piece be spread into multiple squares? This hasn't happened much, but every once in a while, I can think of 2 games where this has happened. A game piece, even though it's only one variable, can fit across 2 spots, right? So it occupies both spot 2 and spot 3, even though there's only one of them. So that really sucks, and maybe you should change the way that you put headers on the game just so you can account for that fact. Now, it's not common, it's not even remotely common, but it has showed up. So be aware that it's a possibility. So those are sort of the frequency rules. On the distribution side, can you leave a board space empty, right? As we had in game 1 this time, right? We had 7 spaces, but only 5 people. So you have a couple of opportunities to deal with that. One is to just leave it empty. The other is to come up with a new variable to fill the empty spaces, which is what I tend to do. So I used X's, right, to fill the empty spaces. Some people have a symbol for it, whatever you want to fill that space. But that sucks when you can leave empty spaces. It means you've got something complex. Can you fill a board square more than once? And that's when things get really complicated, right? In linear games, 4 spots but 5 variables. It means 2 variables could go in the same spot. That happens sometimes. There was a Days of the Week game where Saturday had 2 things in it because you had 7 people, but only 6 days of the week got filled, but 2 people on Saturday. So you have to find a way to draw that into your board, having the Saturday spot be twice as wide, putting little symbols to show yourself you can have 2 things there. In grouping games, oftentimes when that happens and when you have multiple things going into the same spot, sometimes it can make sense to make a grid. And so you can think about opportunities to give yourself a grid setup instead of a line setup to account for the fact that you've got 2 things in the same spot. So those are the complications. Those are those 6 things. It is rare that a game has more than 1 or 2 of these things. It's also rare that a game section of 4 games will have 4 games that all have complications. And yet, on this section, we had 4 games with complications. They were all weird in some way. And we should think about that when we get there. How were these weird? In what ways were they weird? Which ones were easy to deal with and which ones weren't?
Yeah, why don't you go back to slide 8 where we have the questions and go through all 4 games and just see how they deviate from the norm.
Yeah.
Because I told Jake that I thought this section was quite challenging. Usually I get some psychological leverage by finding the easiest game knocking it out of the park really quickly and getting some extra time so that I know, all right, if it comes down to having to brute force, I'm okay. But on this section, I never got ahead of the curve. I was constantly, pulling the average amount of time for each game. They all had a challenge that screwed me up for an extra minute or two. So I never really had one that I thought was easy, where I banked a bunch of extra time for the other games. So what I think would be useful is to look at the games one at a time, and for you guys to identify which of the complications we've articulated on this slide that makes the game kind of challenging. What about the first game in the section? This is the one about the agents
Customer service
training
department.
over 7 months.
So what do we think? Let's look. Yeah, we've got board square empty. And not just one, but two of them.
Yeah.
Any other complication here? Can we leave any pieces out? No answer. Can we leave any agents out? Can we leave any variables out?
I don't think so. I forgot to.
Or rather, how do we know that we can't?
Yeah, there's a better question.
I'll give you
This is the process that I go through. Even if I did everything right, when I go back and study the game more deeply, I find that specific language and say, here's the words that made it so, that I had to use all of those variables.
What word told us we had to use all 5 agents? Yeah, but Isabel, they didn't tell us always 2 will be empty. We deduced that. What did they tell us?
I want to say that they said to use that everyone will be used at least once. I can't really remember the game, but I think there was something that I said briefly.
So there's a word in the stimulus that insists that we use every agent.
Isn't it when it says each agent?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Amy found it. Each agent will be trained. And that's the one. And look, these questions seem, it's not obvious every time, right? But through the process of doing blind review and strategy planning and being meticulous about checking that kind of language is what makes you better at finding that language timed so that you don't make the mistake timed.
It's what makes it easy. Right. It's why I don't have to look for it anymore. I just know, I read it and I'm automatically picking up those details, because on blind review, I'm spending, 20 minutes looking at the language, finding the specific words, going through my framework for identifying complications and dealing with them, etc.
So with this one, I assumed that 2 of the months would have no agents. But whenever I read it now, and of course that's how all the questions answered, but whenever I read it now, I guess it's possible that only one of the months have no agents, except possibly the way it's worded. Do you agree with that or no? Because it says month 6 is one of the months in which none of the agents is trained. So based on the way that read, I would assume that 2 months, no agents are trained. But the question never mentions that one of the agents can't be in 2 different months.
Twice.
Right.
I think that rule forecloses it, though, because of the reason you said. If it's one of the months, then we have to have multiple months in which they're closed. And if we're going to include them all, then that can only mean 2 months.
Yeah.
Of course, that's how I answered the question. But
yeah, Ashton, I agree with you. I think the wording is a bit vaguer than they are typically explicit, but once you get to that first rule,
also it says each agent will be trained in a different month. I mean, it's all really ticky-tack grammatical stuff, but if each agent is trained in a month, then that's only once per agent. A month.
Yeah. Somehow I made that assumption that 2 months were no agents, and the other 5 months had an agent there. And so it worked out for me. But now that y'all are discussing this, I was like, oh, well, why did I think that? But
That's what tends to happen to me. It tends to just work out, but occasionally I make a mistake. And this is the framework that I developed that I think, you know, when I go down that road and then I look back and say, what could I have done to avoid it? Misreading, mistaking, you know, misapplying rules because I had this false conception of how the game works. After I diagram the game before I do the rules, this is the framework that I go through. So for a long time, it was explicit and deliberate. I would do this 4-question framework. It's become 6 questions and it's a lot less explicit and deliberate, but I'm still looking for these things. These are the points of complication that I think matter when you're determining how hard is the game and how am I going to approach it.
Keith, do you want to just pull up the whiteboard and we can do this on the whiteboard rather than doing it on the slide? That might
It's
be
fine
easier.
with me. Yeah.
Yeah. You have the link?
No, send it to me.
Yeah, I shared it on the Facebook Messenger.
Okay. Oh, do you want to go through the complications before we start drawing, or do you want to
Yeah,
jump
I mean,
into it?
you might let's do the complications on 2, 3, and 4, and then you can start drawing things.
All right.
out.
So game 2. You know, again, it's not an easy game. I thought it was going to be 7 ingredients. I thought, oh golly, we're going to put them in order. Finally, we get something easy, and then rule 1 says, you know, if jalapeno is an ingredient, and I was like, whoa, back the truck up. That's not what I was expecting. All right, Jake stepped away for a moment. So let's talk about game 2. What is the complication that makes game 2 difficult according to the framework that we had laid out? I know he took the slide down. Does anyone remember the questions? It was, do we have to use all the variables? Can we, all right, there you go, Isabel. Right, that's the problem. We don't necessarily have to use all the variables. So we don't have a perfectly straightforward game in game number 2 either. It's an order game, but we have to add an out column, and that makes things hard because then it changes the length of the order. It's not just 1 through 7, it might be 1 through 6 or even 1 through 5, it turns out, are all potential orders for this particular game. So I don't like those complications. I try to avoid them. My initial instinct for game 1 and 2 was, nah, there's got to be something easier. Let me skip it. And then I go to game 3, and it wasn't any easier. So let's take a look at game number 3. Although this may have been the easiest game on the whole section, honestly, in terms of how little it deviated from our ideal model. So what are the issues with this game? Remember, the big things are, do we have to use all the variables? Let's start there. Supposing F, G, and H are the groups and the technicians are the variables, do I have to put all the technicians in?
Wait, are we doing the second game or the third game right now?
I couldn't hear that. That we were breaking up a little
Can you
bit.
hear me?
Yeah, try again.
Can you hear me now? Are we doing the second game or the third game?
Oh, the third game. Sorry if I misspoke.
Okay.
Yeah, so do we have to use all the technicians to solve the third game?
Yeah.
Yes, and how do we know?
Each technician will be assigned to at least one computer.
Yeah, each computer, each technician will be assigned to at least one computer, but that language at least also, you know, it's good in one sense, like good, we have to use all the variables, but they didn't say exactly once. That would have been better. At least once means possibly more than once. And it turns out on this game, we can use one or more variables, repeat them in the game. And so that proves to be a complication. What about the boxes in your diagram? Do we have to put someone in each category? Does there have to be a technician for each computer?
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, they tell us the exact distribution too. So the answer to that isn't great. I prefer one-to-one, like an order game, one thing per box. More than one thing per box, that kind of sucks. But at least we know exactly how many things go per box too. So as far as complications go, that's sort of a minor one. I mean, you can't have a group game without more than one thing per box. That's the whole like definition of the group game. So of course we're going to have more than one thing per box. Can we leave any of the boxes empty?
No, it says
Yeah,
two
no.
technicians per computer.
No, right. It's exactly two. So we know that the distribution is set. What's complicated about the game is the repeat, that frequency. That's what we call the distribution. How many things go in each group? How are they distributed? The frequency means how many times, how frequently do the variables go in? In this game, we have 5 variables and 6 spots. So one of the key deductions that you should learn to make on a game, once you see the complication, we have a repeat. You can't just say, okay, well, I hope it doesn't cause too much problems. You have to get a handle on that difficulty of the game. 5 variables, 6 spots, it means there's one repeat. Which one is it? That will be crucial to understanding, any given solution to the game. One thing repeats. Okay, let's look at game 4 and go through our difficulty analysis, and then we'll start doing some drawings and taking questions. What's hard about game 4?
Game 4
Everything.
actually has so many components.
Everything.
I really did not know how to report all from all the components. I was so lost in it.
Yeah, we should probably set this up for you guys then. It's got a little bit of ordering and a little bit of grouping, and so it's hybrid. And then, what about the variables? Do we have to use all of the representatives? Do they all have to go into the solution? Yeah, not just once or twice, but 3 times. So we do have to use all of the variables. It's not like the game, like the recipe game where we could leave variables out. We use them all, but they repeat. And the previous game, game 3, we had one variable repeated once, right? It was the double. So it was a complication, but it wasn't, it wasn't, a complication like this one where we have everyone going in 3 times. So there's 12 boxes, if you set the diagram up as a grid, 12 boxes, 12 variables that are going to go in, 4 variables times 3 times each. It's a mess. You have to be really organized to be good at a game like this. So let's start taking questions and diagramming things out for you guys. It seems like there's a lot of consternation about game 4, so we may want to start there.
You want to start in game 4? All right, let's start in game 4.
Let's just get them happy with it and then get to something more important.
With a game like this, how can you figure out the easiest way?
There is no easiest way.
Yeah, that's a faulty idea.
Yeah, there's the way that you come up with. And the whole reason you do blind review and strategy review is to figure out how you could have found efficiencies in the moment. But there is no point in spending your time looking for the easiest way. The amount of time that you spend looking is going to be more than the amount of time, the difference in the time it takes between the easiest way and your way. So you might as well just do it the way that you see it.
Right. I try to find the easiest way, the best way during blind review and during strategy planning. During the time test, I just try to find any way, whatever the hell works, whatever I know, whatever tools are going to get me closer to the answer. That's what I do. And I try to make smart decisions. I try to do the easiest stuff first, put off the hard stuff. When I get to it, brute force. If I don't know the deductions, go slow to go fast. Don't panic. Those are the things that I do in the moment, but it's all informed by blind review and strategy planning. That's why Jake and I both jumped on it and said, we think that's sort of a faulty idea, because in the moment, you might not think of the best way, but does that mean that you won't think of a good enough way? No, you might not need the best way. Just go, just do it, just do something useful.
And this is why, by the way, we'll yell at you when a student comes to me and they says, well, I did the time section and then I went and watched the 7-sage explanation video. And I said, okay, you realize that JY probably spent an hour, 2 hours, coming up with every perfect diagram, every perfect deduction, every perfect visual representation of a rule, and then spent 3 hours filming it? And you expect that to be a representation of how you should have done it when you only had 8 minutes? That's not how to do this. You're not going to learn anything from his method, because his method is the easiest way, but it's the easiest way for him, prepared in 3 hours. That's not instructive. The instructive thing is to figure out what your next step is. And that means improve upon what your instinct was. What did your intuition tell you? How can I improve that? Not what is some idealized version of it that, hangs up, on a pedestal with shining lights and music and trumpets blaring. And, that's an unrealistic goal. The goal has got to be to improve the thing that I tried. All right, let's start with the setup on this. I made an arbitrary decision 15 years ago that any time they gave me ordering, I was going to take the order and I was going to put it horizontally across the top of my board.
I don't think it's arbitrary. That's how we set up timelines. I've never seen a timeline go right to left. Never.
Nope. Unless
maybe you could make a case for going top down, but I mean, like, if you're going to do it horizontally, left, right that's how calendars are written.
100%. 100%. And so that's how it should be. So here we have 4 months. The first thing I did was I wrote down 1, 2, 3, 4. I even did that before I read the rest of the stimulus.
Me too. If there's any order dynamic to the game at all, I do it horizontally. It is the top of my diagram is the order I know, whatever that order is. And then I go from there.
I made one exception, the one with the building one with the different floors. I got so turned around the one time I did it, trying to do it left to right, I actually built the building.
There's an old game with boxes. It's like this clown, and he's got colored balls in the boxes, and you have to try to guess what color the ball is.
Yep, I did that one too.
That's another one that I do horizontally too.
Yeah. Okay.
So quick question for a game. Oh, sorry. For a game that does, if it's like a clock or like a circle, like a round table or something of the sort, should you do it horizontally, vertical, or should you just sit in the circle as the game says?
There's one of two ways that I'll do it. I'll either do it horizontally, or I will do it horizontally and then add an extra number 1 at the end, or an extra number, whatever the last number is, at the front.
Yeah. I do it horizontally, but I make some adjustments to my diagram to remind myself that the final person is next to the first person. So I just add another column at the end that's a repeat of 1. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1 again at the end, so that I have a reminder that 8 and 1 actually sit next to one another. But I try not to complicate things. I want to make it as similar to what I've done before. I want to use the skills I've built. I don't want to go off on some crazy thing I've never done before.
Yeah, you guys are all sick of hearing me say it, but I'm interested in the way things are similar, not the way that they're different. Make it the same. Why is this like the other games? Okay, fine. I have to make some indication of the differences, but I want it to look as I've always had things looked. I want my rules to look the same. I want my setups to look the same. I want everything to look the same. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 at the top. And then we've got these 3 factory sites, and those 3 factory sites are going to get visited by our people. So I presumed that what I was going to have was a 3x4 box.
This is common on hybrid games.
Yeah.
To put the order across the top and the groups as your horizontal component or vertical component.
Yeah. And I like multiple linear games, and so I consider this as similar to multiple linear game as you can get, and so I'm going to treat it as such. It's a grouping within ordering, or an ordering within grouping. It doesn't really matter. You can set it up as a 3x4. I'm going to do it that way. So I had that. And then I started dealing with the rest of the stimulus. I've got these 4 people, and once I get my 4 people, I'm going to make a list of them. And so I like to make my list on top, B, W, Y, Z, and I figure out what I know about them. Everybody's going to make 3 visits. The next thing I did, before I moved on, I said, everybody's going to make 3 visits. Does that mean I have to use everybody? Is any spot going to get left out? 4 people, 3 visits each, 12 spots. I've got 12 spots. Everything's going to be filled. I checked right away, even though I knew the math. I checked anyway. Does that make sense? Okay, what are the implications, right? What does this mean over here? Here, I'll zoom out for you so you can see Keith as he's setting up his as well. What does this mean for me as I'm setting up, right? And then I go to the rules, right? And I have these rules. V has got to be in Ghana once and India twice, with Ghana visited sometime in between. And as soon as I read that, I said, that sounds like my world setup. That restricts me pretty hard as to where I can put V. That doesn't sound like very many ways. So I said, okay, fine. I'm gonna put that in my pocket, but next to it, I'm gonna write V has got to do I, then G, then I. So I knew that to be true. Watts has got to be in Ghana at least once. W is going to have Ghana as 1+. I didn't know how many times, but at least 1+. And then Y is right before G in Ghana, which means I can ignore that rule entirely, because what I know now is that in Ghana, I'm going to have a YG block. A YW block. That precluded the necessity for the previous rule, right? That rule's covered by the fact that I have this rule. So I don't need it anymore. It's already done. Y is not in the 4th month, so Y can never equal 4, and I'm actually going to stick that up there to remind myself vertically as well. Right? I'm put it on my board. And if you're in France, then you are not in India. That's where I left myself. So I said, look, the only one that felt like it was worldsy was that first rule. It feels to me like that rule number 1 about V being an I, then G, then I in that order means that I only have 4 setups that are even possible. So I'm going to start there. And that's where I started and started doing my deductions. Before I move on, anything about the rules that confused you guys? Anything about my setup that you want to say, hey, why didn't you do it this way? Or is this way just as good? Well, that's good. I like that. All right, so what Keith has done over here on the right is he's shown you the 4 ways that you can put V in the places that V has to go. Yeah, I was going to delineate with some color here. Do you one better here, Keith. I'll go this way. Purple in between your worlds. So you can see what Keith did here. He said, okay, look, I'm going to take V and I'm going to put it in all the different combinations that it can be in, right? It can be 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 1st, 2nd, 4th, 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 2nd, 3rd, 4th. And I did the same thing. Stuck my V in those places. And then once I had done that, I said, okay, I have this next rule that I need Y and W to be together next to each other in the G lane. And so that's what he's doing here. And in each of those worlds, that forces Y and W into a place. Well, that's really helpful. Then I started thinking vertically, right? I said, okay, now that I've got some columns sort of full, I know that no person can visit 2 sites on the same day. So I took a look at column 3 in the first world, and I said, hey, what could go here, right? Because I've got Y and V underneath it. That means it's either Z or W. But it was still either Z or W. That wasn't great, but not terrible. And then I can do that in each of the columns that has two things set up. I know that the third one's a binary, right? In world 2, I've got W and V. That means it's either Z or Y in the fourth, and since it can't be Y, this one's got to be a Z.
The game actually, we can eliminate that first world.
Yeah, we can get there with the deduction.
All right, keep going.
We're not there yet, right? So then in world 3, again, we have a WZ binary. And here we have a YZ binary. Then I said, okay, the only other rule that I've got right now that I know for sure is this one, right? That has Y not in the fourth group. If Y can't be in the fourth group, how am I going to fill these two spots? I have to fill them with a V and a Z, but I have no V's left. Bye-bye, world 1. I can't fill the fourth column. So now I'm down to 3 worlds. And this is where I stopped, by the way. Because I got to this point, and if I don't know the next step immediately, I move on. And I go to the answers. And I think this is a really instructive moment, right? It is okay for you to get this far into a deductive process and then not get any further. Because look what I've done for myself. I know very clearly what's possible with V, right? I know that I can't be first, second, third. That means I know that I've got V in the fourth spot, right? In India, right? It's true in all 3 of the worlds. And then everything else is just sort of a maybe. I'm in decent shape everywhere else, and I'll figure it out as I go along. Didn't hang me up and didn't make the game take 15 minutes. And it's okay for you to get that far too. It's still better than having nothing. Keith, do you want to go further? Did you get further in your deductions?
When I was doing this timed or sort of semi-timed in preparation for class, I didn't use worlds, and I got all the questions right, and I just kind of made the deductions where I needed to and used brute force where I needed to. I'm pretty flexible about what happens on a timed test. But then after the test, I went back and I always do this as an exercise. I try to determine how many solutions there are for every game. That's part of my blind review process.
I love that.
And so I went back to game 4, and it was devilishly difficult. I'm not sure I know the answer to it, and I've spent hours on it today. So I have done this game, I don't know, not just the questions, but diagrammed it 5 or 6 different ways. I've tried different ways to do worlds. I've tried different breakdowns in this existing world structure to count the different number of solutions. And I've come up with a different answer every single time. And so I'm not done. I'm probably going to spend another hour or 2 thinking about this game over the next few days, and certainly over the next week and months as I do it with other students. But this game is the one that's challenging me right now. Here's where I have more insights to gain. And so I think that the desire to jump ship from these and just say, well, I hope I don't see that on the test, is completely misguided. The difficulty of it is what makes this so valuable to study. Getting good at this will make a simple order game seem like a piece of cake, but you have to take the time to get good at this, and that requires a lot of effort and heartache. Like when I keep coming up with different answers, different hypotheticals, different calculations on the number of solutions, that doesn't feel great for me. I wasn't happy to come to class tonight and say, I don't know how many solutions there are to this game, but that's the process I have to go through to figure it out. It's deliberative and slow and tedious.
Yeah. And and in looking at this, I've come up with 3 different ways to get to that point where I know every solution, and I think I've come up with a new one that I'm going to try, which is to use the first month in Ghana spot. I'll put it in rainbow for you guys. So this spot here, this spot here, right? The extra spot in Ghana first month in the first world and fourth month in the other two, and use that to split the board 3 ways. Right? And I'll say, look, I'm going to try W in that spot, Y in that spot, and Z in that spot for each of the 3 worlds. And I'm going to split my 3 worlds into 9 worlds, and I think from there I can get all the answers. I think that's the way I'm going to do it. I don't love it. I would never do it timed. But I'm sure I'm going to discover something about the ways that the distribution of things in 2 dimensions interplays with one of these rules. So that if I see one of these rules again in the future, I know how they work. There's something about that if you're in the top row, you're not in the bottom row rule that's bugging me. And I want to figure it out. And I think that's got to be your job in blind review and then strategy planning. And that's got to be the objective when you repeat a game. This is the thing that I think people miss when they repeat games. They just repeat them trying to get the right answers in the correct amount of time. And they're missing the opportunity to learn something. So this is as far as I would have gotten timed this time around. Does anybody have questions about the questions on this game?
Sometimes I find if I just give students a really robust diagram, they can take that and go rework it. So feel free to borrow our diagrams, rework the games. But if you want to work through a question or two together, please feel free to ask. Jake is really patient about explaining these.
Oh, thanks.
That's why I invited some of my students to participate in this, because to some extent, I think that I'm suffering from the curse of knowledge. When the deductions are very clear to me, I feel like JY in the video. I'm like, what? You don't see it? It's like, you know, it's not easy for me to understand how to get my students to that, you know, to the same level of understanding.
Well, I will say one of the things that I enjoy doing about a game like this is working a problem through brute force that you're not used to doing through brute force. So, for instance, number 23. I would imagine that if you struggled on this game, number 23 would have been challenging. Did anybody struggle with number 23?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna set you off with an opportunity to try it on your own, and I want you to think about a couple of things. I want you to think about which variables you know cannot be all 3 at the same site. And you can eliminate right away as a possibility.
Yeah, do the easy work first on these. Don't start with the hardest thing. Like, you know, what's the stuff you know for sure cannot visit the same site 3 times?
And the other question to ask yourself is, which site, which country could it happen in? If you can answer those 2 questions, there aren't very many ways for this to work. So if you struggled with number 23, have those be the 2 things that you work with. Which variables can it not be, and which sites can it and can it not be?
Let's start answering those.
Yeah, what do you think? What variable cannot do this? Cannot repeat 3 times in the same place?
What's the obvious one?
V.
V, right. I mean, let's just start with the simple.
Can't. Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay, and now I'm gonna make this a little visually easier to look at. I'm gonna erase our first world there, so we don't have to look at it anymore. Okay. Do we know if there are any others that cannot do it based on our worlds?
Y and W can't.
Y and W can't either. Right. There's not enough room to do it in Ghana. We only have 1 space left, and they each have to have 1 there. It means Z is the only one that can. Okay, where can Z do it?
In France.
In France. Okay, if they... Sorry, I'm older than you, and I'm thinking of Coneheads from SNL. We come from France. Okay, so if Z can do it...
Conehead, by the way.
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad. If Z can do it, and Z is the only one that can do it, and the only place that Z can do it is in France, now's the time that you try to do it, right? make a board. Boop, 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 boop. And put 3 Z's up there, right? And I'm going to use my first world as my model. I'm just going to put 3 Z's up there. I'm going to put the rest of world 1 up there, and I'm going to try to make it happen. Right? Because why not? I'm just going to try. Okay, now that I've done that, whatever I put here, whether it's W or Y, is not allowed to go in the bottom row. I'm going to choose arbitrarily, make it Y. That means my other Y's got to go there, and my other 2 W's are there, and I did it. Fine, it's 1. Z can do it. I don't care.
Did you know if a different representative goes in?
Oh, sorry, can't do it that way.
Yeah. But I wouldn't have known that had I not seen your diagram.
Yeah, sorry, so. I can't do it with world 1. I have to do it with world 2. Sorry. Oh, you know what I could do? Here, I'll fix it.
W and then.
Oh, no. I just have to move my Z. Z, Y, Y, W, like that. Yeah, I just couldn't do 3 Z's, 2, 3, and 4. I had to move the Z over. But there you go. All you have to do is make 1 work, and then you're done. You don't care if it works multiple times. You don't care why it works. You don't care what the deductions are. You just care that you can make 1. And if I were being responsible, I would have checked it against my rules before answering the question. I would have found the mistake that Ashton had, and I would have fixed it. So there you go. This is how we answer it. We find the things that are obvious first, and then we attempt. I know that the other 3 variables can't. It's either 0 or 1. Let me find a way that Z can do it.
I think one of the reasons why my approach is not ideal anymore is because, as I explained to many people, I learned how to do logic games before the modern version of the test, when you had far less scratch paper to work with. And if they're going to give you 5 sheets of paper, front and back, just try everything. Brute force the whole damn test. Get really good at brute forcing, and then let the deductions follow from there to give you some relief from the physical strain of the brute forcing. But don't think that the deductions or the best way to do the game or the best diagram, that's not the path forward. The path forward is understanding, what does the question mean, and how do I test every single answer choice as fast as possible. And at first, it's really slow going. I think that's why people don't like brute force. It takes a long time, but you get better at it as you practice it. And what's more is you get better at making deductions, because every single time you have to try and answer, you have to make all the deductions to figure out if it works or doesn't work. Like the deduction that Ashton just made about the having a different, person for all 3 of the mines in any given month, or all 3 of the destinations in any given month. That is practicing making a global deduction on a specific iteration. And so that's the kind of thing that just makes you better at deductions in general. Brute forcing is really powerful if you just commit to it early on. Yeah. If you screw around and then at the very end say, maybe I'll brute force it, like, no, you won't. But
yeah, when students are starting out, I make them brute force everything. You're not allowed to graduate to worlds until you can brute force every answer. And once you can do that, great. Now we're going to talk about how to make some of those deductions and be efficient ahead of time so that you don't have to do all of that work. But I want to see that you can execute. I want to see that you can execute deductions.
It's amazing to me how many times I'm staring at a question on logic games and sort of mentally frustrated with it. And all I have to do is test out a couple answer choices. Sometimes I'm down to 2 and it makes no sense. I'm sitting there debating 2 like deep conceptual things, and I could just write one of them down and try to come up with a solution. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, the other one's the answer. I mean, it's so simple, but I'm stuck in that mentality that, I was in 15 years ago, where there's no extra scratch paper. If I write that down, I might need that space for something else. And so I'm going to sit here and force myself to visualize it. So don't do that. Diagram liberally every question, every answer, every single thing that you're having trouble seeing in your head. Just write it out, but make sure to strike it out if it turns out that it doesn't work. If it ends up breaking a rule, you don't want to rely on that faulty work. So I'm just careful. I try to be more liberal in my diagramming, but I'm careful to erase or strike out solutions that don't work out.
Are there other questions on this that people are interested in? Or should we move on to a different game?
Hey, Jake.
Yeah.
So for question 18, I did what Keith said, because once I got all of the rules, and then all of a sudden I looked at it and I was like, what the heck? And so I brute forced it, and I ended up with like A and B. And that's when I had to actually draw it, because I was like, what the hell am I supposed to do with these two?
Right.
Because they were so close, and I just had to figure out which one it really was.
But that's exactly what brute forcing is. We haven't talked about this in a long time, Keith, but Keith and I came at complete and accurate list questions from completely different perspectives when we first started working together. I was of the mind, and this partially comes from sort of building people's games work from the brute force perspective, that the best way to do complete and accurate list questions was to literally write all 5 of them out and then check them against your rules. So with one like this, obviously they only give you 2 of the 3 lines. They only give you the F and G line, and you have to fill in the I line, right? But if you're confused as to which ones are possible because you didn't make deductions ahead of time that were sufficient to know, you've got to write it out. Write out A and B, and then say, okay, what does that mean for my I line, since I only get the F and the G line? Can I write in my I line and fill out a complete possibility? And if I can't because it breaks a rule, it's wrong. So it can be powerful in brute forcing if you're in a bad place. Just with that first question, use that question to test 5 iterations to see if they break rules or not. And that can bring you to a place where you find out whether you understand how the rules work and how they don't.
I'm doing office hours tomorrow, by the way, and I would love for you guys to come and let's play around with some different ways to diagram or attack game 4, because I'm still really curious about how to get my efficiency, better on that game.
Yeah.
Not on the questions. I don't care about those questions. I did fine on those. There were deeper points of logic on that game that if they had asked me about it, like Ashton said, she missed a rule. I did too. They didn't ask me the right questions to take advantage of my confusion there. And so going back, part of my job in blind review and strategy planning is identifying those things that I skated on and fixing it. And that's what I spent a lot of time doing today, going through and figuring out who can work, a particular month and who cannot, given the other people who are working. I sort of make that front and center because I overlooked it in my time test. That becomes the focal point of my review and strategy planning and in blind review.
All right, taking votes. Among the other 3 games, 1, 2, and 3, which one do you guys want to talk about in terms of setup, in terms of deductions?
Maybe 3.
Does that sound good?
I also vote 3. I vote 3.
For 3.
Couple
Several
of votes for
votes for
3. All right, so I'm going to move down here.
Aw, this game?
Yeah, well, I tell you what's hard about this game is the double. It's scary. Okay?
It is?
And I mean, it's not to you. You're used to accounting for it.
I just ignored it.
All right, so we have 5 technicians. They're examining the data on 3 computers, F, G, and H. Okay? So the first thing I would do is I would go out there and I would say F, G, H. 1, 2, 3. And we're going to have each computer examined by exactly 2 technicians. right? So technician 1 and technician 2, which means, guess what? We have a table again, right? And this one's a 2 by 3. This one's more typical of it's multilinear, except it's multi-grouping, right? Now there's no difference between the top and the bottom. So then I thought better of it. I was like, I don't need to do this because these are meaningless over here, right? Being on the top row and being on the bottom row is no different from each other. So I said, nope, that's no good. Instead, I'm just going to have 2 spots. And that's the way to know the difference between multilinear or multi-grouping and just a regular old grouping game, is whether or not there's another categorical variable. If there's a distinction made between the 2 people in the group, then you need a second line. But in this case, there's no distinction. It's just the 2 people in the group. So in that way, okay, I'm not going to bother anymore. Okay, but the problem is I only have 5 people. RSTWX, right? If I only have RSTWX, it means I'm going to have a double, right? Somebody's going to be doubled. So I might want to keep track of who the double is. So I'm going to give myself the opportunity to do that. And you see Keith is over here writing rules furiously. But I double checked. I was like, there's a lot going on here. Let me make sure I caught everything. I've got 5 people. I've got 6 spots. They're distributed evenly. The one thing that I have to worry about is who's the double. Everything else should work out okay. Okay. Then we have 2 conditionals. Conditionals are not great for worlds. So I'm not going to worry about that yet. No computer is examined by both S and W. Okay, that's good. S and W can't be together. And exactly 1 computer is examined by both R and T. That's the one I like. Because if exactly 1 is examined by both R and T, it means I have 3 worlds. I have the world where R and T are in F. I have the world where R and T are in G. And I have the world where R and T are in H. And that way I know that I can start based on that. And everything should fall into place after that. Once I've got that, I can execute my rules one by one. Look in world 1. When you place R and T, those don't overlap with other rules, but place F does, right? We've got 2 things that are supposed to be in F, and those don't trigger rules, right? When they're not in F. That's no good. But on the other hand, if you wrote your contrapositives of those first 2 rules, you know that things do happen when certain people are not in G or are not in H. So for instance, in world 2, because X cannot be in G, S cannot be in F. That means S must be over here, and that there's no S here. Same thing in world 3, right? When X is not in H because there's no room for him, that means that W cannot be in F. That forces W here. Similarly, in world 2, since S is in H, now I can go back to my rules. With S there, that forces W over there because they can't be together, and that forces S here. In the top one, in world 1, since S and W have to be in different worlds from each other, I can make them a binary. One of those worlds is going to have S, the other one will have W. I just don't know which is which. And then I can worry about everything else after the fact. Now, if we look over at what Keith did, holy crap, we did it exactly the same. And we're in exactly the same place. You can see Keith cascaded R and T down here, 1, 2, 3 worlds, and now he's dealing with where the double is. Used X as the double?
No, not necessarily. I didn't worry about the double.
You're just placing X.
Yeah, it has to be there because of the conditional.
Which am I missing a conditional? What is it? X if S is in F. Oh yeah, if S is in F, X is in G. That one goes there.
And then world 2 has W triggering X over to H.
Over at X and H. Yep. I'm not looking at my previous work, so I have to go back through the rules now. I'm too busy talking to you guys. And so this is where we end up. Almost everything filled out if you look at Keith's work here, right? all we're left with is a couple of empty spots, right? You don't know where to place X in the top world. So X goes in one of those places, and then the other one can be filled, and you can think about this, right? What does the other one get filled with? It could be another X. If it's in H, well, then the other one can't be an, it depends on where it is, right? So there are a lot of things that could get filled in there.
I was going to say, I mean, the other one is the double. Every blank spot that I have here is the double. So,
right.
It just whatever goes in there that doesn't break the rules, basically. So I can't put S and W together, but otherwise anything else is fair game for the double.
Yeah. And that's why to leave it blank, right? Like, a lot of people are convinced that to do worlds, you have to fill every blank with something. You don't here, right? This is good enough. We're most of the way through it. We know that one of these two will be X, right? One of the things I do here, I'm going to bastardize your diagram here.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll do this for myself. One of those is X. I don't know which one. And if it's X, then the other one is the thing that's the double.
Sometimes I put it on the line if I know there's a variable that has to go in two adjacent boxes. I put it on the line as a visual reminder instead of off to the side. So instead of the way that Jake put it in both slots, I find that to be a little inconsistent because it shows two variables when there's only one. But so I like to put it on the line. But there's lots of different ways to diagram it. The whole point of blind review and strategy planning is for you to come up with what is your symbol system going to mean and what does it have to mean to do what you need it to do to answer the questions efficiently. PowerScore's system might do that for you or it might not. Mine might do that for you, it might not. You won't know unless you take it and run with it and tweak it and add and change the things that you need to change to bring it to your level.
And over and over and over again, and I'll say it to you guys now and I'll say it again later, my system is my system, right? This is the way I write mine. This is Keith's. Yours will be different. That's okay. It doesn't make yours wrong that it doesn't look like ours or it doesn't look like Seven Sages or it doesn't look like PowerScore's. It's yours. And what you have to do is spend the time in blind review and strategy planning and doing it over and over again, right? You have to spend the time developing what your system is. Don't let it be random. Let yourself hone a system for yourself that is consistent and repeatable and understandable by you.
You know what I think is challenging about this is that it's hard for us to be critical of success. So if you get a bunch of questions wrong, sure, you're going to come back like sort of open to suggestions, open to ideas about how to do the game differently. But when someone has done the game and gotten most of the questions right, then I find that the next time they do the game, the blind review and strategy planning tend to look a lot like what they did on the time test. And so I want to challenge that and just say that getting all the questions right should not indicate to you that you learned everything and now just go through the motions to get to the end of the exercise. You have to actually work harder to make the easy games valuable to you. You have to come at them from different angles. So if a game was easy to you, use blind review as an opportunity to practice brute forcing everything, even the things you don't need to brute force. It's an exercise in efficiency and the brute force, method. Make worlds on games where you don't have to make worlds. Otherwise, you will never learn how to make worlds. Blind review is the time to be creative and unpack some of the intricacies of that. And then strategy planning is when you look back at all of it and say, okay, worlds didn't work worth a lick. Like this worked pretty well. My next time test, here's the direction I want to go, given all of the things I learned over the 2 days I spent studying that section.
And if you're struggling in games, you have to come at it the other way, right? My blind review was filled with stuff that I didn't realize timed. I'm never going to remember it all. So I need to boil it down to the things that I think are most fundamental and most valuable. So if you struggled on this game and you didn't build worlds, I'm going to challenge you to think about this and this alone. Why is it that Keith and I both chose the last rule exactly one computer is examined by both Ruiz and Tapia as the rule we built our worlds around. Why that one? There were three other rules. Why did we choose that one?
Right. Why didn't we use the conditional rules or the SW clue? Does anyone want to give opinions about that?
Yeah, I actually had a quick question. So on the rule that it says if Smith examines F and Xi examines G, would it not go the other way? Meaning if Xi examines G, then Smith examines F? Because I was struggling on that during the first question.
No. That's why we use an arrow to remind ourselves that it's one direction logic.
If Smith is in F, then she is in G. The only thing that you can know from that is that if she is not in G, then S is not in F.
Right? It gets so tricky because the contrapositive is a valid deduction, but the logic that you were articulating is not valid.
Yeah.
Okay. So then one more question. So if X is not in G, right? Well, then never mind. Never mind. I completely. Yeah. I was about to ask a stupid question. I just realized myself. Okay, no, cool.
It's not a stupid question, and I'm glad you started to articulate it, because as you start to articulate it, you hear it out loud, and you made the connection. So it wasn't stupid. You needed to ask it in order to make the connection. It's really tough. Finding real-world scenarios in which these kinds of deductions make sense to you is really hard. So I always use the conditional about clouds and rain. If it's raining, there are clouds in the sky. If there are clouds in the sky, does that mean it's raining? No. Only sometimes. But if there are no clouds in the sky, then it's definitely not raining. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Conditional relationships are tricky for us because they're very rare. In the real world, relationships between things tend to be subtle. Usually, probably, many times, often, there's very few actual phenomena that have strict conditional relationships, but on a logic game, it's purely arbitrary. It's abstract. They can just say whatever the hell they want to say. So they can define the relationship in a strict abstract way, and that's what they're doing when they use that conditional language: if, then, unless, only if, all, only, none. You have to take it perfectly literally and never read the logic in the alternative way.
So if this game was hard, I'm gonna push you on the idea of why is it that Rule 4, the one about R and T, why is that the one to build the worlds around?
Yeah, why is that the center of our organization here? Why do we choose RT? Someone else did worlds. Ashton, you did. Why did you choose RT?
I actually didn't. Well, I did. So as soon as I read the first one, if Smith examines F, then X examines G. Yeah. And then the second one, I saw those two, then I created two different worlds based on that.
What are your two worlds?
My worlds actually look just like y'all's.
Well, I mean, in one world, S is in the F column.
And then X is in G, and I just started out that way, so I immediately drew that. And then whenever I read the next rule, I drew another world with just W and F, and then X and H. And then whenever I got to exactly one computer is examined by both R and T, then I created my third world, because I filled out, because based on the first two worlds that I was starting to create, I realized that R and T could only go in one column, and then I saw the pattern, and I created one more world where R and T was in F, and then I filled everything out based on that.
Slide over a little bit, Jake. You're on mine.
Still. Yeah, no, I'm building it first before I.
You don't want to show them.
No, I don't want to show them yet. So here's something that we came to. This was, I don't know, 2 or 3 classes ago, we had a game in which there were two different rules that were relatively easy to build worlds around. And it's actually true here too. You can build worlds here around Rule 3, around no computers examined by both S and W. You totally could. The problem is that, and this is the question I ask myself when I'm saying, do I want to build my worlds around this? How many ways? Right? When I look at Rule 4 and I say, how many ways can I put R and T together? What's the answer?
3.
3. Okay. How many ways on Rule 3? How many ways are there to put S and W in different groups?
That I have no idea because I didn't build my worlds around 3.
Okay, everybody
I started to build it on 1 and 2.
Everybody pick up your paper and your pencil, and I want you to do it right now. 3 groups, right? F, G, H. How many different ways can you place S and W into different groups?
I want to say 4.
I've got 6, but Jake doesn't have 6, so I don't know what's
Yeah, I
up.
do. I have 6.
Oh, there's probably 6.
Yeah, here they are, guys. If S is first, W can be second or third. If S is second, W can be first or third. If S is third, W can be first or second. There's 6. And now look what I can do. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go to Rule 4. Where do I put RT? Guess what? It gets forced in each of these into a spot.
Oh, you're almost done. I mean, like, if you could crack it, if you could get both of those rules together, set up your worlds quickly, you're going to make quick work of the questions. It's like a 1 or 2 minute question set.
And then in each of these 6 worlds, we have 1 spot left in 2 different groups, right? One of them will be an X, and the other one will be the double. Now the question is, do any of them get placed already? World 1, S is in F. That puts X there. In World 2, S is in F. I'm supposed to put X in G. Ah! That world doesn't work. Right? World 3, no rule gets triggered. In World 4, W is in F. That puts X in H. That world's gone. X and H. 2 of the 4 you place X. And look where we are. We're back to 4 worlds. Right? And the only difference between these 4 worlds and these 3 worlds is that up here, this one I put in that binary switch, SW or WS.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's interesting.
It's the only difference. It's the same worlds. They're the same. Because they're built on the same rules.
But just to be concrete about it, the reason that Jake and I started with RT is because it's concrete, right? It's affirmative information rather than negative information. And the number of options was very small. So we could start with 3 worlds and then see if we needed to split the board further or whether that was a fine level of detail. The other thing is, because it was not only affirmative and a small number of options, but also it seemed to me that because it was 2 variables instead of 1 and was going to completely occupy one of the boxes, it also seemed to me that it would drive deductions. For example, if we put RT in G or H, then we know X can't go there, and then that's going to trigger the contrapositive to one of the 2 conditionals. So there were a number of reasons why I thought that RT was the most concrete place to start building your worlds. I don't like to work with negated information, but then again, the fact that negated information is abstract is an argument for building it into the diagram and making it affirmative and less abstract. So maybe you're onto something, Ashton. If you want to come by office hours tomorrow, we can chat about it more and set up the worlds different ways.
Okay. With me, so I like this method that y'all are teaching us by writing down all the different ways that we can diagram, because I am learning from it. But I also like, so you took what appeared to be the rule with the most options as far as and how to diagram all that.
Mm-hmm.
I like that too, because even taking that one, it just showed me that rules can still be created, even if I don't think of the absolute best way to create the world. And creating the world is still going to help me to answer the questions quicker, even if I
100%.
don't
Yeah,
pick the best one.
100%. I will say, I find it very difficult to build worlds around conditionals.
I do too.
Yeah, I don't like that as a way of going about it.
Me neither.
Because it's very restricting in the affirmative, and it's very open in the negative. And I don't want that imbalance. I want a thing to tell me it's this way or this way. Or
I'll
this
give
way,
you an
this way, or this way.
example of that, Ashton. So let's look at the first conditional. Is if S is in the F column, or in the F group, that leads to a deduction. That puts X in the G group. So there's some concreteness to that. But if we go the alternate route and we say, well, suppose S is not in the F column, now we're in abstract land, because that means that S has two options. It's either in G or H, and we're not sure which. And then X, there's no deduction for X. X could be in any of the three columns. So that's what Jake was saying, that in one scenario where the sufficient condition, where the rule is triggered, you reach deductions and it feels concrete and nice. It's the alternate scenario where you don't trigger the conditional. That's where you're off in la la land and you're not making progress toward making the world more concrete. So I tend to go for affirmative, non-conditional blocks that can only go in a limited number of places, like RT.
I'll need to practice that. For me, my brain was in time panic mode. And so I saw the first rule and I was like, okay, I'll make one world. But I didn't fill it out. I just put
yeah, come chat with me tomorrow. You can make worlds with conditionals, but you have to know how to do it, and it takes some care. So if you want to learn, come chat with me tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's a thing to think about, man. I love thinking about the sort of the theory of practice here. I want you to think about this in terms of the way you think about LR, right? When we're doing LR, we don't read the first sentence and immediately start building the structure of the argument from the first sentence. We read all the sentences looking for the claim.
Right.
I read all the rules looking for the one I can build worlds on. It's about your stance. It's about your perspective. What are you aiming to look for? Right?
You notice,
I'm looking for
that sounds less stressful.
You notice, Ashton, when I've taught you in the past how to do the deductions, that 3 or 4 step method that we've talked about, you notice that always comes after symbolizing all the rules. I always try to preface it. I say, okay, diagram the game, symbolize all the rules, and then I want you to do this process, the single rule deductions, the multiple rule deductions, blah, blah, blah. It gets elaborate after that. But step 1 is just get the rules down, get them diagrammed. I don't like to start thinking about deductions before I do that, because it could be that there's another rule coming up that's going to simplify things if I just am patient enough to wait for it. Or it could be that whatever deductions I'm trying to work out are not going to be the deepest, most important deductions. I need to see all the rules, as Jake mentioned, to make some decisions about how to allocate my time. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
So there are some games where it's not possible to make worlds, right?
Not that it's not possible, where it's not helpful, perhaps.
Not helpful.
But I think that on blind review, if you are good at making worlds and you're intent on doing it, you can probably do it with every game.
During timed Or
No,
just
no, on blind review, untimed, yeah.
okay.
So I very quickly, I just want to show you guys with game 1 the same deal to see just how powerful and how fast it can be, right? So here we are, right? I've already sort of started setting it up. I've got 7 spots. I have QRSTU and I have 2 X's, which are going to be my 2 blanks. And I know I have a blank in 6 because I've already read that rule, right? Month 6 is one of the months in which none of the agents is trained. U comes sometime before R, but I don't know when. Quinn is immediately before T, like that. And S is the third one trained, right? So there are 2 things before S, and now I know that there are 2 things after S because there are only 5 people total. So I did something like that. I already know something, right? I've already made a deduction in my mind. But before I do it, I want to think about where I can put Q and T, right? Because Q and T is the block. It's the one that's definitive, right? Q and T are next to each other. I know exactly where I'm going to put them. They're either going to go first and second, second and third, third and fourth, or fourth and fifth. Why do I stop there? Because I know 6 is an X. So it can't be 5 and 6, and it can't be 6 and 7. I'm already down to 4 worlds. Right? If this is true, I know that in the first world, S has to be next. Right? If S is next, U and R have to come after S. And so I have a couple of possibilities. They could be 3, 4, 5. They could be 3, 4, 7. They could be 3, 5, 7. They could be 4, 5, 7. There are a lot of possibilities. But I know they go in that order. They're going to go S, U, R in some order, and an X sprinkled in between them somewhere. I just know there are a lot of possibilities, so I'm not going to mess around with it. In World 2, I've got nothing I can put before Q and T. I can't put S there because S has to be third. And if I put U there, then S won't be third. That's an X. And then all I have left is S, U, R. Right?
Jake, that makes a lot of sense.
I know it does.
Well, no, but you know what? When I first did it, remember at the beginning I told you how I misread it where S had to be, I thought S had to be third. Mm-hmm. Well, when I did that, mine didn't look like that at first. And I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah. So then look at the third line. Look at the third line, right? I can't put S before Q and T because then it can't be third.
Right.
I can't put U before Q and T because then my only option would be to put U, S in first and second, and then S wouldn't be third. And S on the other side makes it fourth. I can't put anything before them either. That would have to be 2 X's, which is impossible, and that world's gone. So what am I left with down here? What's the last thing I can do? The last thing I can do over here is to do U, R, S, Q, T, X, X.
Okay.
It's the only way to do it to make S third in that bottom row.
And there's only 6 solutions to this game. This is why I like doing worlds on blind review, because it really helps me to think back on why was this game easy or difficult? How easy or difficult should it have been? And then like on game 4, how difficult could it have been if they had given me a few questions that played on some of the obscurities of the rules that they didn't play on? So you can analyze your games much more deeply than just one or two reviews. Go ahead, Jake.
I would have loved a question where it asked how many different months is it possible for nobody to have visited. Right? That would have been a great question. In how many of the 7 months is it possible for there to be no training?
Oh, on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it turns out it's only the 2nd month that absolutely must be filled. That would have been an interesting question.
There is one question that gets at it indirectly. You have to figure out that the second one can't. It's a specific
it's
question.
That's question 5.
That's question 5. Yeah, they're willing to do it the forward direction, but the counting questions are always the hard ones. How many of the months can? And so that's challenging. You have to do the must be true and then go the other direction. So yeah, this is how I ended up doing it.
I did it the same way. I realized that QT was highly restricted. There were 4 options. I was thrilled when one of them didn't work out, and it was getting so concrete that I worried I had made an error.
And by the way, I want to point out to you guys that, you know, Keith and I are in the constant learning process as well. But the reason that I was able to so quickly realize that QT was the one that I had to do was that it reminded me of a multilinear game that we did 6 months ago that had this block of double L. And that it turned out that double L was sort of a 4 possibility, a 4 world block. And it hadn't occurred to me on that game, and now I remember it every time. And I see a block of things and I'm looking to place the block.
The other thing is, if that last rule got you, if you plugged in S third for every single one, it has to go on your action plan. I think that's a fundamental reading error. So on my action plan, because it cost me a minute on this test, is going to be slow down when you're reading the rules and think about the rule a little more deeply before you commit it to writing. I'm usually pretty quick to read it and then say, oh, I know how to diagram that. And I sketch it, you know, almost instantly. But my haste hurt me there. I think if I had just thought about it for a second, I would have realized that this was an underfunded game. That's what Power Score calls it when you have fewer variables than spots, underfunded. So the fact that it's underfunded should have alerted me that that I couldn't make that deduction so quickly.
And what's interesting is what it reveals is not only that we didn't sort of take the cue that it was underfunded in order to not misread that rule, but it means we also gloss over it in games that are 1-to-1, right? That we take the wordings as being equivalent, because every time we have a 1-to-1 linear or a 1-to-1 sequencing game, right, we just sort of presume that the third agent and being in the third month is an equivalent statement, and it's not. Those aren't equivalent. They just happen to be equivalent to each other in that circumstance only because it's a 1-to-1 game. 7 people in 7 spots. When you're underfunded, suddenly those things take on different meanings. And so what it reveals is that the wording is not equivalent.
That's why today, you know, when Jake was saying, like, show me the exact words that make it so that we have to use all the variables. The reason why we're so picky about that is not because we just want you to identify those words when they appear, but you have to be so good at it that you also notice when they don't appear, so that you can see on this game that it wasn't 1-to-1 and that there were some looseness with the language that's created by that, you know, that lack of tightness in the organizational structure. So that's on my radar. The next time test that I do, it's going to be slow down, think about the complications before you start diagramming the rules. Just a basic go slow to go fast, you know, action plan for me.
Yeah. Any other questions on games? Or do we want to take 30 seconds to talk about the task for Thursday? All right. All of this being said, in games, we talk about the thoroughness of our blind review being critical. The task for Thursday with that Google form to fill out your blind review thinking on LR is slow, deliberate, and feels like, to any student who's new to it, it feels like enormous overkill. It really, really does. And it is the most valuable kind of work you can do for the way that you think about LR. I have designed that form in a way to force you to go slow. I want you to go slow. Don't rush through your blind review. especially on the questions that you're getting right. Because the questions that you're getting right are the places that you're going to have revealed to you the wisdom of your intuition. But if you don't understand how wise you already are, you're not going to understand how to apply it to the questions that you're struggling with. So go slow in your blind review. Really be deliberate. Really be particular and meticulous. And extract every bit of learning you can out of every question on that section. All right, everybody? Awesome. Any other questions? Come to office hours. I'm at 10. Keith is at 1:30. All Eastern times, of course. And message us anytime. And otherwise, we'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Night, everybody.
Thanks.